See, madness, as you know, is like gravity. All it takes is a little push.
I grew up in a rag city in Connecticut in poverty, but then again, nearly everyone else was too. Around 13 or 14, my mother, who had a stroke while having an aneurysm, was warned that one blow to the head could be fatal. She used to take me everywhere. We lived off a disability from my father, so she didn't work. Instead, she would take me cigarette butt hunting at night in the downtown business district, which was ripe with half-smoked cigarettes. It's important to note that my mother was a friend without nicotine, and I would do everything to get her some. During the day, we did the soup kitchen tour where we met some nice people who were homeless or poor. It was at a soup kitchen where we met Ray. "Don't worry, he's gay. He's not gonna try nothing," my mother's friend said during our introduction. He was a tall man, probably 6'2" or 6'3", very thin, with skin that hung from his bones as if he had once been a rather large man. He wore small, thicker lens glasses, but spoke with a southern accent and a gentleness. Something about him was alluring, and he seemed rather paternal to me. Ray and my mother Linda hit it off and became friends. We met up at the soup kitchens, and soon the nightly adventures to the ashtrays in the business district stopped, as he would often give my mother some money and smokes. He also fed me chips and fast food, a much appreciated break from the canned corn I would otherwise be eating. Fast forward a little, a couple of months pass, and we begin to trust him. He seemed genuinely excited to see us and was very kind, so much so that my mother did not hesitate to go over his house and take me along. At his house, my mother would take up residence on a love seat, and Ray would sit next to me. He often put his arm around me and pressed me up to him. I loved this because I was young and had a rotten tough time in school and was without friends. My family was broken, so I didn't see my father. The genuine love he had for me makes me cringe now that I'm older and more aware. While walking down the hallway from his apartment, his hand brushed my backside. I matured early and was about as tall as my mom and half a foot smaller than him. The hallway was tight and I thought about it for a second, but dismissed the caress as innocent. I knew I swung my hands like an ape whenever I moved, so I could hardly fault him. Other people we knew saw us with Ray more and more. They became concerned. Grace and Matt had known Ray. They pulled my mother aside and told her that he was insane. They told her that they had gone to buy a trailer, but Ray wanted it as well. They argued for a bit, but the couple didn't budge. That trailer burnt down a couple of days later. Another friend had told my mother that Ray's son was a dentist and was doing well for himself, but had been molested as a kid by Ray. Ray never told us he had a son, not even a hint of it. When my mom told me this, I broke down and cried, but she wanted to keep it hushed. I should point out that my mother was an immoral woman. She had been old enough to know what she was like before she had health issues. She suffered, but my brother said that she was always bad, but afterwards became a monster. She would still see Ray and bring me around him. I broke down in class one day. I looked at my teacher, who really loved me and had been there for me during rough times. She asked if I was okay because she saw my eyes water, but I burst out uncontrollably and sobbed. I could not stop thinking about him touching me and what I had heard. I know it sounds melodramatic, but the uncertainty and the betrayal of my trust wounded me greatly. I don't know if I can give out the school name or not. We'll call it LMM, as that is the school's initials. The teacher told the principal and guidance counselor. The guidance counselor took me into a room and sat me down. He asked me a bunch of questions about Ray that I answered. He kept me alone with him in a room and would not tell me why. I found out later they called my brother's school and my mother at the same time and interviewed them over the phone. My brother had moved into his girlfriend's house, so he hadn't really dealt too much with Ray, but said that he knew him, and my mother ended up telling them everything. The police were called and they drove me to my house as school had ended and they did not want me walking home. They got to my house and told my mother that they would talk to Ray about me. They came back an hour later and told me that he could not speak to me anymore. They couldn't stop him from coming near us, but he was absolutely forbidden to talk to me. It turns out they found him outside the school with money and a new bike. The money was for me because he knew I valued cash to get my mom smokes, and the bike was for my brother. Ray planned to kidnap me that day. I have no doubt about it. A few years more until I turned 16 and moved out of my house, I would run into Ray while walking with Mom. He would always stare at me, but talk to her. My mom would talk back with him, and she never addressed what happened. I moved to Maine at 16 though, away from them both. So, to the mother who I suspect was willing to give me up for her addiction, and to the stranger who slithered into my life like a snake, let's not meet again. Okay, so this event only occurred really recently, and I still can't believe it happened. I live in Sydney, Australia, and I'm very used to the occasional insane or creepy person on the street or bus, etc. I know how to deal with them and act around them most of the time. A few weeks ago, I decided to go shopping at a big shopping center known as Westfields in Australia. I'm not sure where they're called elsewhere. They are always busy and it's hard to find parking, but I managed to get a great spot in the parking lot on the level where you can enter the center. I shopped and everything was good. I had some lunch, bought some groceries and a new dress. I exited the shopping center and started walking towards my car. There wasn't anybody in the parking lot except for a few cars trying to find a spot. Nothing out of the ordinary. Then I noticed a lady walking in the other lane next to mine. She had tangled, matted and thinning hair. She wasn't dressed in the nicest or newest clothes. She was talking to herself, but I didn't think much of it because people do that when they're trying to remember something or going over something in their head. Then she starts screaming. Nothing in particular, just gibberish. I look over to see what she's doing or if she's injured, but nope, she's fine, just staring directly at me and screaming. She locks eyes with mine as soon as I turn to see what she was yelling about. A few seconds pass and nothing happens. She keeps screaming while keeping direct eye contact with me. Then her mouth spreads into an insanely terrifying grin. She stops screaming and starts bolting towards me. I was frozen for what seemed like an eternity, but it was probably only 3 seconds. I hightailed it to my car, chucked my shopping bag in the seat next to mine, cracked all my eggs, and slammed the door shut just in time. This lady starts banging on my car, screaming while trying to open the doors. I quickly back out of my spot, not caring if I knocked this batshit crazy lunatic to the ground. I didn't. She was fine, physically. But at this point, she climbs onto my fucking trunk and tries to break my back window. I start to move the car and she jumps off but chases after me for a few levels, and then I lost her. My heart was beating so fast I thought I was going into cardiac arrest. I called the police and told them where I saw her and what she did. They didn't find her at the shopping center, and I haven't heard anything else about this. But my boyfriend offered to get me a new carton of eggs. This happened a little over a decade ago when I was an undergrad. I worked as a pharmacy technician my sophomore through senior years. At a pharmacy, of course, you have regulars. One regular was Joe, a mid-30s man with long straggly hair and an affinity for bizarre outfits. He was very sweet, but also very ill, mentally and physically. He was on a cocktail of antipsychotics, anti-anxiety, antidepressant, etc. Also, he was on medicine for AIDS. Normally, Joe would come in with his mother, who took care of him. However, his mother was older and had her own health problems. Towards the end of my junior year, Joe started coming in by himself, so he would walk from his home or take a taxi. Joe told me frequently that I looked like a young Michelle Pfeiffer, that I should be in LA, yada yada. Aside from the curly blonde hair, I never really saw the resemblance, but okay. I was polite, told him thanks, and asked him how his mother was. Made general small talk while I rang up his scripts. He never gave me the beware vibe. My senior year, Joe's mother came in without him and told us that Joe wasn't doing well. He was refusing to take his antipsychotics, and she was getting too old to defend herself if Joe went into a rage. She was having him placed in a home for patients like Joe. I didn't know until that day that Joe was technically under guardianship. The courts and his doctors deemed him too ill to make important financial and medical decisions. Joe's mother gave us the medical release so that Joe's new home could send their staff to pick up his medicine. We didn't see Joe for about 4 months. It was the end of my senior year, a Friday night. Just me and the pharmacist were working because Friday nights are slow. I was reading a magazine when I heard,
"Hey, Michelle."
I'm not Michelle, so I didn't look up. Then angry,
"Michelle!"
and a slap on the counter in front of me made me look up. It was Joe. He was bleeding profusely and left a bloody handprint on the counter. I was shocked, and all I could do was slowly back away to put distance between myself and the very bloody Joe. The pharmacist came rushing over to ask Joe what he was doing here. His home had picked up his meds on Tuesday.
"I wanted to see Michelle. I miss her."
Then he started opening the waist-high door to get behind the pharmacy counter. The pharmacist called the store manager and told the manager to call 911, while she called Joe's mother.
"Michelle, come here. Give me a hug."
No, I don't think that would be appropriate, Joe.
"Give me a hug."
Then he just started screaming this over and over and attempting to climb over the counter. The pharmacist told me to go into the back storage room and lock the door. This just pissed Joe off. He started picking up items, which covered them in blood, and threw them at us. It was a chaotic mess. A patron was about to attempt to subdue Joe, but both the pharmacist and I both shouted not to touch him, due to him being covered in blood and positive for HIV. We told the small crowd that had formed to leave for their safety as Joe was flinging items and getting blood everywhere. Eventually, the police and EMTs arrived. The store manager must have explained the blood and HIV issue because they had on protective gear, long gloves, face masks, etc., and were able to forcibly sedate Joe. The store had to be shut down, and a special cleaning crew had to come in and clean the entire store. Joe's mother came to apologize after the store reopened. She explained that Joe had developed an obsession for me and grew angrier and angrier each month when he was not allowed to tag along to pick up his meds. He attacked one of their home residents the night of the incident, so the home grounded him and sent him to his room. Joe broke his window and crawled out through the broken glass and walked to the pharmacy. The home did not know he had broken out until his mother called frantically. His mother was considering suing the home for negligence, and she had moved Joe to a more secure mental health facility.
Happy Valentine's Day weekend to everyone. Not a lot of romance happening in the Gribble house, but we did have a lot of action. On Sunday evening this past week, a pair of childhood friends named Katie and Lauren investigated with us. The two girls had a mutual friend that had passed away when they were kids, named Lauren. As they investigated, they could hear her name being said through the ghost box. Several times in a row, and all over the warehouse. The girls told our lead investigator, Kelly, that she had been to see a psychic in the past and had been told that her deceased friend Lauren was definitely with her. Another group investigating on Sunday night were using the Ovilus on dictionary mode, and they had both the Ovilus and the spirit box say, "Save her," twice in a row. While Kelly was seated in the slave quarters with several guests who were investigating, they heard from a spirit named Anthony and his wife, as well as a child spirit named Will. Tuesday night was great as well. The ghost box and ghost meters were the star of the show that night. A ton of different names came through, like Adam, Helen, Tom, Meredith, and of course, Paul. Paul was his regular charming self, and called one of the investigators as Fat Ass. One of the women investigating asked, "Why would you say such a thing?" To which she got the response of his laughter through the ghost box. Paul was fairly cooperative that night, actively communicating through the ghost box with several groups of guests. However, when they requested that he do things like touch their hands or move the EMF detectors, his response was simply no. We got some amazing EVPs that night through the ghost boxes. One group investigating asked a spirit if they were nice, to which they got the response, "What do you want?" Another group got a sinister response from their questions. They asked a spirit named Tom, who told them that he was the one who killed Meredith and the lady by the door. The investigation on Friday night went great as well. Orbs were everywhere, as well as EMF and ghost meter action. Don't forget about the Raggedy Ann doll. Several times during the evening, she lit up from head to toe, not just the hands or feet separately. One man investigating told a female spirit that he was communicating with that if anything or anyone decided to follow him home that evening, that he would be very ticked off. The only response that he got to that was laughter through the ghost box, along with the word clown. Another group was using the spirit box, and ended up conversing with a soldier from the Revolutionary War who answered questions about the battle through the ghost meter. The battle was the Siege of Savannah. A few children were heard from Friday night as well. One little box told the investigators that his name was Leo. When they said goodbye to Leo for the night, the right hand of the Raggedy Ann doll lit up. Over near the residual haunting area, they could hear children's giggles through the spirit box. When Kelly was leaving the warehouse for the night, she thought that she could see an older man standing inside the gated area of the Gribble house. Needless to say, she left with chills that evening. Last night, on Valentine's Day, we had two separate investigations. During the first, the Raggedy Ann doll had some very interesting action. While seated in the slave quarters, everyone investigating was focused on the doll, just as the doll moved all on its own. A little child named Wendy was heard from the spirit box in the slave quarters as well, and the REM pod lit up with small touches. As the guests were leaving the warehouse from the first hour, a few of them were looking back into the building and swore that they saw two women entering the area by the bathroom. but no one was there. During the second investigation, a group of 2 saw a black shadow figure moving along the Gribble House walls, accompanied by a dramatic drop in temperature as well as whispers and strange noises. Yet another great week of investigation at the Gribble House Paranormal Experience. My boyfriend and I were big fans of nautical history, so we decided to spend our Valentine's Day in 2007 on the Queen Mary. As I'm sure most of you are aware, it's reported to be haunted. That was also the kind of thing that appealed to us, but mostly we have BAs in European history, so it was just cool in general. Anyhow, we got a historical suite, meaning that it was mostly like it had been when the ship was commissioned aside from an old TV. The first night, Valentine's Day night, when we stayed there, we both woke up to what sounded like the drawers of the built-in dresser being opened and slammed shut repeatedly. We're both not the types to freak out and run, but I can't really say why we were both so low-key that we just acknowledged that the other was okay and eventually went back to sleep. Mainly because it was truly alarming at the time. Maybe we just trusted that if we were both okay, that everything else was okay? I really don't know. But then, we didn't know the history about the room. The next day, we went on the ghost tour. Turns out that we were sleeping in the second most haunted room on the ship. The room next door was Churchill's suite, where he planned battles during World War II. While we didn't experience the cigar smell that many have reported while staying in that room, it was still interesting that without knowing our room was known to have paranormal events happen, we did have an experience. We had some really weird camera malfunctions in the engine room, as well as creepy, aggressive feelings in an old museum room on the ship, which we only found because we tried to get into every unlocked room that there was. It honestly felt like someone was creeping up behind our backs. But again, just feelings, so shrug. Anyway, that's my Valentine's Day ghost story. I am a 19-year-old female. When I was 8, right around Valentine's Day, I received one of those small manila envelopes in the mail. It had no return address, but it was sent from another state, where I didn't know anyone from. When I opened it, it was simply a folded sheet of computer paper with a picture of Linus from Charlie Brown, holding a heart and his blanket. It appeared to be drawn and colored by hand. On the inside was a short Valentine's Day message with a small personal detail about my life that only someone close to me would know. Naturally, I thought it was probably my grandparents or my parents trying to do something nice for me. Every year, it had a picture of Linus, included a detail about my life, was typed in the same font, and was from a different state. For example, the Valentine's Day after I adopted my dog Bailey, the card said, "Would Bailey be jealous if you were my Valentine?" I kept most of these, and managed to find a few as I was rummaging through old, worthless junk. When I got older, I finally mentioned it to my grandparents, fully expecting it to be them, but they swore that they weren't the ones sending the cards. I honestly believe it, because I had expressed my concerns by this point, and they aren't the type that want to scare me. Neither are my parents. The only other family I have in the US are my dad's parents, who don't speak English well and have never owned a computer. They had immigrated here, and there was no way for them to know people in so many states. Aside from my parents and my brother, who found it strange as well, I have no other family. I still get these cards every year, always the same except for one Valentine's Day a few years ago. I received a stuffed teddy bear and a big chocolate heart along with the card. Needless to say, I did not eat the chocolate, and I searched that bear, half convinced that there would be a hidden camera. After that year, I started just receiving the cards again. In any case, as a child, it was sort of exciting and mysterious, like a secret admirer. Now, it's just unnerving. I have racked my brain for years trying to find out who it could possibly be, and I have come up empty-handed. It still makes me uneasy, but if this person wanted to hurt me, I think that they would have done it by now. I've never felt outwardly threatened by them, so I don't think there's much that I can do about it. When I was in high school, I lived in a really small town in Texas. It was the kind of place where everyone was either related or hated each other. I had no family tree there, so yeah. But I did have a pretty blonde girlfriend, and was pretty hated for that too. Nothing major, just petty harassment and occasional fights, but it had been escalating. So that's why on Valentine's Day, my girlfriend and I decided to skip the school dance and just stay in and watch a movie at her house while her parents went out. Just better to avoid trouble. We borrowed her dad's car, a little Honda hatchback, and went into town. We stopped at the video store for a movie and went to the Dairy Queen for some ice cream, and then headed home. Now she lives in the complete boonies, out in the middle of the woods along a long, lonely road with no streetlights. We're chatting, eating our blizzards, when all of a sudden a car comes up behind us. No big deal. What was a very big deal was that when the headlights flooded the interior of our car, I saw two hands on the back seat and a head coming from the hatchback part of the vehicle. As soon as the lights hit, the head and hands retreated back down. A solid chill ran through the entire length of my body. I slowly reached down and pulled out my pocket knife, which was the only thing I had. She saw me and asked what was wrong. Loudly I said, "Nothing, I just have to stop at my friend's house real quick." She knew that was crap. I didn't have any friends. I pulled over at the next house that came up and jumped out of the car, yelling at her to jump out too. She popped out in total confusion. I flipped the driver's seat forward and lunged into the back seat in full maniac mode. This guy popped up like a jack-in-the-box, with empty hands waving around saying, Hey, what are y'all up to tonight?" It was some strange kid from our high school who we had never in our entire lives spoken to before. Ever. I said, "What in the holy hell are you doing in our car?" His reply was, "I thought you guys were going to the dance and I was just hitching a ride." We sat there staring at him with our mouths open, wondering what to do. He tried to act real cool, and obviously we were in the middle of nowhere in some random person's driveway, so whatever he was planning was totally forgotten. We actually ended up driving him to the dance and dropping him off. The whole time he's telling us to come inside with him. Yeah, no. We dropped his ass off and noped out of there as soon as we could. After he got out of the car, my girlfriend started crying and shaking. She was so freaked out. I have no idea what he was trying to do when the lights caught him crawling out of that hatchback. I hated that high school. Before I begin my story, I'll give you a quick summary of the location where this happened. At my middle school, in the other half of the building built in the 1950s at some point. All the classrooms have little windows next to them. My reason for bringing this up is a horrifying event that took place during my 5th class today involving one of these said windows. I walked into the classroom and set my stuff down, preparing to ask the boy next to me named Cameron if he had a pencil. As I was about to open my mouth, I heard a loud smacking sound followed by a crunch, followed by a shattering type noise. Sort of like when you drop a box of pencils or markers. All of a sudden, I was deafened by screams of shock and agony. My classmates were now in the hall, shocked by something just barely out of my line of sight. I walked into the hallway with them. Being on the shorter end of the height spectrum, I had to shove my way to the front of the group. What I saw next will haunt my dreams for the rest of my life. I saw a girl rolling around on the floor, smearing blood on the dirty linoleum tiles. At first I couldn't tell what happened, but I got the picture after a few seconds. This girl was a special needs student. After being rejected by a boy in her class, she went completely ballistic and without thinking had punched one of the windows next to a neighboring classroom's door. There was broken glass and blood everywhere. Thankfully, the classroom next to ours is vacant, and no one was in there at the time of the incident. After about 10 minutes, teachers got the situation calmed down. The girl was completely insane and tried to fight the man who came to help her. The school ended up going into a lockdown. She had to go to the hospital, and even though no one really knew her, we were all in legitimate shock by the horrible scene. I really hope that she's getting the help she needs, and hope that she doesn't have a fistful of glass shards. I've seen some really crazy things at my school, but that might have been the most messed up thing I've ever witnessed. This happened February 14th, Valentine's Day. Me and two of my friends decided that we would get a cheap hotel room and take some LSD to kick off the loneliest holiday ever. I've done it before, but was not in a good mindset to take it that night, so I settled for a bottle of wine. Anyway, we weren't familiar with the area of the hotel, but it was cheap, and that's all that mattered to us. It was around 3 in the morning, and outside the door we hear someone stumbling around, bumping into the walls. But it was Valentine's Day anyway, so we just brushed it off as a drunk couple on their way to get it on. The stumbling stopped and went silent right outside of our door. My friends are tripping at this point, and I'm pretty drunk. We hear this woman start sobbing outside, and I'm assuming that she sat down with her back on our door because we heard her slide down the wall and collapse right on the other side. The woman starts trying to speak to us through the cracks of the door, saying that she lost her dogs and was wondering if we could help her. It was 3 a.m., and we didn't know anything about the area, like I said, so common sense would dictate don't respond. And we didn't. The woman then proceeds to bang on the door, saying that we stole her dogs, and that she's gonna come in and quote-unquote effing murder us. She was scratching and banging on the door for 10 minutes straight, and then just stopped. My friends were starting to have a bad trip because of her, but when she stopped, I tried to reassure them that she was gone and that they could go back to having a good time. To prove it to my friends, I checked through the peephole to verify that this woman was indeed gone. But there she was, trying to stare right back at me through the other side of the peephole. I watched her as she stepped back and stood there, as still and solid as a literal concrete statue. She had her eyes right on mine. I doubt that she could see me through the peephole, but I was making dead eye contact with her. The woman then proceeds to start screaming and throwing her body against the door, which thankfully woke up our neighbors and they called the front desk. The woman behind the front desk comes and tries to get this woman to leave. The woman left, but was going down the walkways of the hotel being loud and refusing to actually leave the property. She was still crying out for her lost dogs in the hotel hallway at 3 a.m. They said that they never saw her leave and implied that she was still inside, so they just told me to keep an eye out for her and call the front desk if anything else happened. The police were called and stayed posted outside the hotel for an extra 30 minutes and then left. It turns out that she was on some really heavy drugs. But still, hearing this woman throw her body onto the door, saying that she would kill us, was incredibly traumatizing. We left early that morning and never went back. About 2 years ago, I was going shopping for a Valentine's Day gift for my girlfriend. It's about a 5 to 10 minute walk to the store from where I live. It was around 8 p.m. and I just wanted to get home. I was walking in the road because there's next to no cars going down the road, and I didn't feel like going through the park. I was approaching the park when I realized that I was being followed. I thought nothing of it at first, so I just kept walking. He then got closer and closer, and when I was walking past, I hear a, "Hey kid." I was shocked, but I wanted to ignore him, so I kept going. Then he said it again, a bit more violently. So I turned around, and this guy was within reach of me. I'm 6'1", and this man was a bit taller. He then tried to set up a conversation like, "How's your night?" I felt a bit relieved, and kinda thought poorly of myself for judging him too soon. But I was right in my assumptions. He then tried to keep a conversation going and proceeded to ask me where I was headed. I just told him that I was going to the store. He then walked up to a car and said, "I can give you a ride." I said, "No thanks, I can walk from here." He kept asking that same question, and then he said, "What about car surfing?" And then he tried to show me what it was. I still declined. This guy was really creeping me out. I was still walking down the road while this was happening. He followed me still, and thankfully I was reaching the store, so he left me alone. But not for long. I got the candy heart chocolate box and a teddy bear, and was walking back home when I saw the guy again. The weird part is that he was following me from the other side. I feel like he waited for me just to come walking by again. This was starting to scare me. He then yelled at me again, and I was terrified. I was hesitant, but I turned around. Now he was starting to jog his way over to me. Then I noticed something off. The car was gone, meaning that this guy had either walked here or he wasn't alone. I acted oblivious, like I didn't notice that the car was gone. He tried starting another conversation. I was really uncomfortable, so I just said, "I really need to get back," and I started walking faster toward the fastest route home, which is through an alley. When I was going through, he was gone, and I was thankful. But when I was walking down the alley, I don't know what it was, but I saw the same car that he was claiming as his own. When I got home, I wanted to know more about this guy. I looked online for something about him and there was nothing, of course. I wanted to know about the car. I didn't believe for a second that it was his, so I looked it up, and it was reported as stolen. I reported it just in case. I'm not sure if they ever found it, or ever found the guy in general. I just hope that I never have to deal with him again.